On the morning of 25th October 1760, in a small panelled closet on the first floor of the haunted royal apartment known as Kensington Palace, King George II of Great Britain was struck down on the privy. He had risen at 6, drunk a cup of chocolate, dismissed his page, and walked alone into the closet to relieve himself. His German valet, a man named Schroeder, heard a noise like a chair falling. When Schroeder opened the door, the king was on the floor with a wound to the right side of his face, where his head had struck the corner of a mahogany cabinet on the way down. An aortic aneurysm had ruptured behind his ribs. He was 76 years old, and he was dead before the physicians could be summoned from across the courtyard. This was not the first death in these rooms. It was not the 5th. By the time Schroeder closed the closet door behind the body of his king, Kensington Palace had already swallowed a queen who refused to let her ladies near her smallpox, a king thrown from a horse on a Surrey molehill, a queen worn down by 17 failed pregnancies, and a German elector whose corpse was carried back through the gates in a sealed lead coffin. Stop for a moment. You have been told, perhaps, that Kensington is the cheerful palace, the garden palace, the one with the duck pond and the pram pushers and the gift shop selling tea towels printed with corgis. That is the version the official guidebook will sell you at the door. It is not the version that the walls remember. 5 monarchs died inside these walls. 2 future queens were born here, including the one whose name would be given to an entire age. 8 royal residents have lived in apartment 1A since 1873. 1 feral child wore a brass collar through these corridors for 28 years. On the night of 14th of October 1940, a single German bomb gutted the state apartments and reduced the state bed of James II to ash and gilt splinters. Walk through the gates today, and 3 things will reach you before the guidebook does. The smell of wet box hedge in the sunken garden, the strange acoustic flatness of the king's staircase, where the painted courtiers crowd in from every wall and no echo returns, and the silence of the cupola room, where a brass collar engraved with a German address still sits in a glass case, waiting for someone to ask whose neck it once locked around. On this channel, we tell the story of every great English house through the names the official guidebook forgot. Tonight, we will speak 3 of those names. Caroline Murray, who carried a candle through the long, shut years of a princess raised in isolation. Joseph Wright, who stood in the corner of apartment 1A for 31 years and heard every argument that ended a marriage the newspapers thought was a fairy tale. And Lily Burns, who folded the last nightdress of the most photographed woman in the world and was dismissed at 8 o'clock the morning after the funeral. If you find these forgotten histories worth a watch, smash the subscribe button. It's the only thing keeping the lamps on at British manors. It begins with a Jacobean merchant, an asthmatic Dutch king, and a house in a village called Kensington that nobody of any importance had ever wished to live in. In 1605, Sir George Coppin, a clerk to the crown under James I, built himself a modest brick house on a low rise of ground 2 miles west of the city walls of London. He called it Nottingham House. It passed through 3 owners across the next 84 years without anyone of consequence noting its existence. Then, in the early summer of 1689, William III of Orange, newly crowned alongside his wife Mary, rode out of Whitehall in a state of physical misery. Whitehall Palace stood on the river. The river that summer was thick with coal smoke and marsh mist, and William, who had been asthmatic since childhood, could not draw a clean breath inside its walls. He went looking for higher ground and drier air. He found it at Nottingham House. He paid Daniel Finch, the 2nd Earl of Nottingham, £20,000 in cash, and within a fortnight he had set Sir Christopher Wren to work. Wren remodelled the house between 1689 and 1695. He doubled it in plan, added 4 pavilions at the corners, threw out the Jacobean staircase, and built in its place the King's Staircase, a vast painted cavern in which William Kent would later cover every wall with the faces of George I's actual courtiers, frozen mid-gossip, leaning down over the banister to watch whoever climbed. Wren built the cupola room with its octagonal dome and its painted classical gods. He built the Privy Chamber and the Presence Chamber and the King's Drawing Room. By the winter of 1695, William had a palace that could hold a court, and Mary had a set of private apartments overlooking the gardens, and the asthmatic king could finally sleep through a night. Mary did not sleep in them for long. In December 1694, before the last of Wren's panelling was even fitted, smallpox came to Kensington. Mary, who had been inoculated as a child and believed herself immune, was not. She felt the first fever on the 20th. By the 23rd, she understood what was happening. She did something then which has been recorded by her chaplain and never sufficiently acknowledged by her biographers. She wrote out a list of every servant and courtier whose duties brought them within 10 feet of her bed, and she ordered them, by name, to leave the palace until she was either recovered or dead. She did not want to be the queen who killed her household. She died alone with 2 physicians and a single nurse on the 28th of December 1694. William wept for 3 days and refused to leave her room. He outlived her by 7 years. On 21st February 1702, riding from Kensington to Hampton Court, his horse Sorrel caught a hoof in a molehill near Hampton and went down. William broke his collarbone in the fall. He was carried back to Kensington in a litter. The collarbone was set. Pneumonia set in by the first week of March. He died in his bedchamber at Kensington on the morning of the 8th, and the Jacobites in the taverns of London raised their glasses that night to the little gentleman in the black velvet waistcoat, meaning the mole. Queen Anne came next. She moved into the king's apartments in the spring of 1702 and spent 12 years there, enduring the slow ruin of her body. She had been pregnant 17 times. Not one child had survived her. By 1714, she was so swollen with gout and grief that she could no longer climb the king's staircase and had to be carried in a sedan chair. She suffered a stroke on the 28th of July. She died at Kensington at 7:30 on the morning of the 1st of August 1714, and with her died the House of Stuart. The Hanoverians arrived in September. George I, German-speaking, 64, indifferent to England, took the apartments without enthusiasm and used them mostly as a stage on which to receive ambassadors. He died on the road back to Hanover in June 1727, struck down by a stroke in a coach near Osnabrück. His body was returned to Kensington in a sealed lead coffin and lay in state in the cupola room for 9 days before being shipped on. His son George II succeeded him, and on the morning of 25th October 1760, the closet door closed behind the last king ever to die at Kensington Palace. The palace then went quiet for 59 years. George III preferred Windsor. The staterooms were locked, the chimneys were left cold, and it was into this hush on the morning of 24 May 1819 that a baby girl was born in a small bedchamber on the 2nd floor of the South Range. Her father was Edward, Duke of Kent, 4th son of George III. Her mother was Victoire of Saxe-Coburg. The Duke of Kent died 8 months later, leaving his German widow stranded in a foreign palace with an infant and a court allowance she could not understand. Into that vacuum stepped an Irish equerry named Sir John Conroy, and out of his ambition grew what later historians would call the Kensington System. The Kensington System was a set of rules designed by Conroy and the Duchess to break a child's will. From the age of 5, Princess Victoria was not permitted to sleep alone. Her bed was wheeled each night into her mother's room. She was not permitted to walk down any staircase, including the Great King's Staircase, without an adult holding her hand. She was not permitted to speak to any visitor unobserved. She was not permitted to read any book her mother had not first inspected. She was not permitted to be alone with anyone outside the household for any reason whatsoever, including her own uncle, the king. Conroy's stated purpose was to keep her dependent until her 18th birthday so that he might be appointed her private secretary the moment she came of age, and so rule England through her. The unstated purpose was crueler. He wanted her broken. She was not broken. On the night of 19th of June 1837, William IV died at Windsor at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain rode through the night to Kensington and reached the gates at 5. The princess was woken at 6. She came downstairs in her dressing gown and slippers, her hair loose, and she received the news standing alone in the room where she had been forbidden to stand alone for 18 years. By breakfast, she had given 3 orders. The first was that her bed should be moved out of her mother's room that morning. The second was that Sir John Conroy should not be permitted to enter her presence ever again. The third was that the household should begin packing for Buckingham Palace. She never slept at Kensington again. 11 years earlier, in 1726, another child had been brought through these gates. He was found in the woods near Hamelin in Hanover, naked, walking on all fours, eating leaves. The local farmers caught him in a net. George I, who collected oddities, had him sent to Kensington as a gift. He was given the name Peter, and at first he was kept in the cupola room and dressed in green velvet. He could not learn to speak. He could not learn to sit at a table. He could not be trusted not to wander. So a brass collar was made for him, hinged with a small lock and engraved with the address of his keeper. He wore it for 28 years. He died on a farm in Hertfordshire in 1785. But the collar came back to Kensington, and it is in the cupola room still, behind glass, beside a label that does not give his real name because no one ever learned it. The palace dimmed again in the 19th century. Victoria refused to set foot in it. Various minor royals were quartered in the apartments. Then came the night of 14th of October 1940. A single high-explosive German bomb fell on the North Range at 11 minutes past 9. The state apartments were gutted. The Queen's Gallery roof collapsed. The state bed of James II, a vast carved and gilded structure on which 2 kings had slept, was reduced to splinters and burnt silk. The fire crews worked until dawn. The damage was not fully repaired until 1959. In the spring of 1947, Princess Margaret moved into apartment 1A on the ground floor of the South Range. She would live there for 31 years. Her marriage to Anthony Armstrong Jones, Lord Snowdon, was conducted in those rooms, and so was its slow collapse. There were parties that ran until 4 in the morning. There were arguments overheard by the policeman at the gate. There was, by the end, separate bedrooms and separate floors. The divorce was granted in May 1978. Margaret stayed on alone until her death in 2002. And in those rooms, behind a green baize door, stood 3 servants whose names the official guidebook does not record. Caroline Murray was 19 years old when she was hired as a nursery maid at Kensington Palace in the autumn of 1819. She was the daughter of a Glasgow shoemaker. She had been hired for her steadiness and her quiet voice. From the day Princess Victoria was 8 months old until the morning of 20th of June 1837, Caroline Murray slept on a truckle bed within 5 feet of Princess. She carried the candle on the nights the child cried and was not permitted to be comforted by her mother. She was present at every supervised lesson, every supervised meal, every supervised walk. She was the one constant warmth in a system designed to give no warmth. On the morning of the accession, when the princess came down the great staircase to meet the Archbishop, Caroline Murray was standing at the head of the stairs holding the princess's shawl. Victoria looked up at her, took the shawl, and said, in a voice the under-butler later recorded in his journal, "Thank you, Carrie. I shall not need you up there." Then she went down. Caroline Murray was pensioned off 6 weeks later. She lived another 41 years in a cottage in Esher, paid for by the privy purse, and she never once gave an interview. Joseph Wright was 43 when he was taken on as footman in apartment 1A in the autumn of 1947. He had served in North Africa with the 8th Army. He was, by every account, the most discreet man in the household. He stood in the corner of the drawing room of apartment 1A through every party and every quarrel from 1947 to 1978. He was present in February 1976 on the night Lord Snowdon shouted across the dinner table the sentence that the maid heard from the pantry and recorded in her diary, the sentence that ended the marriage in everything but law. Joseph Wright never spoke of any of it. He retired on his 64th birthday on 11th of March 1968 with a clock and a handshake and went back to a terraced house in Wandsworth. He died in 1981. His diary, kept locked in a tin box under his bed for 30 years, was sold to the Royal Archives by his daughter in 1992 on the condition that no extract be published in her lifetime. Lily Burns was 24 when she became chambermaid to the Princess of Wales in 1990. She was Welsh, from Tredegar. She folded the nightdresses, drew the baths, and turned down the bed in apartment 8 of Kensington Palace for 7 years. On the morning of 6th September 1997, the morning after the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, the household manager came to Lily Burns at 8 o'clock in the staff corridor and informed her that her services were no longer required, that the apartment was to be cleared by the end of the week, and that a final month's wages would be sent on. She left through the tradesman's gate at 9:30 with one suitcase. She has never spoken to a journalist. She lives, at the time of this recording, in a bungalow in Newport. In August 1981, Diana Spencer had moved into apartment 8 as the new Princess of Wales. She raised William and Harry there. She decorated the rooms in pale yellow. She held the parties for the homeless charities and the AIDS hospices. She fought the slow public war of the 1990s from a study on the first floor. She left for Paris on the afternoon of 30th August 1997 and never came back. The car crashed at 23 minutes past midnight on the 31st. The gates of Kensington were banked 5 feet deep in flowers within 48 hours. The cellophane crackled in the wind for 2 weeks. The smell of decaying lilies hung over the south front until the 3rd week of September. In 2017, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, William and Catherine, moved with their children into a renovated apartment 1A, the same apartment in which Margaret had lived and Joseph Wright had stood silent for 31 years. In the same year, the sunken garden directly below the south front was replanted as the White Garden. 250,000 white flowers laid out in the shape of a memorial that does not name itself. The state apartments above are open to the public 6 days a week. The brass collar of Peter the Wild Boy is still in the cupola room. The painted courtiers on the King's Staircase still lean down to watch. Caroline Murray died on 11th February 1878 in a cottage in Esher of pneumonia, holding a letter from Queen Victoria that she had been sent that Christmas and had not yet answered. The letter was buried with her. Joseph Wright died on 4th April 1981 in a terraced house in Wandsworth of a heart attack while polishing a single black shoe at the kitchen table. The shoe was one of a pair he had been given by Lord Snowdon in 1962. Lily Burns walked out through the tradesman's gate of Kensington Palace at 9:30 on the morning of the 6th of September 1997, carrying one suitcase, and she has not spoken of those 7 years to anyone outside her family in the 29 years since. Behind the glass of a case in the cupola room, a hinged brass collar engraved with a German address still catches the lamplight, and no card beside it gives the real name of the child who wore it for 28 years, because no one ever learned it. Subscribe for more deep investigations into the hidden histories of Britain's great castles, palaces, and royal residences. Leave a comment below telling us which place we should investigate next. British Manors, the hidden history of the buildings that shaped England.